I haven't really talked about technique on this channel yet. Instead, I've focused on how important it is to keep decision making and judgment as part of training. But do I think technique is important? Absolutely. But the key questions are what defines good technique and how should we train to develop it? I spoke with my friend Anton Kjellberg and he described good technique for a forehand loop as being able to hit with power, control, and variation in direction.
And also being able to follow up each shot with another shot.
But that raises the question, is the same technique used for a hard diagonal loop as for a soft, high, and straight one? The Russian neurologist Nikolai Bernstein studied motor control in the 1920s and introduced the idea of repetition without repetition. He found that expert blacksmiths had high variability in their movements when hammering, constantly adjusting based on their starting position and movement flow. What didn't change, however, was the outcome. The best blacksmiths constantly hit their target. Obviously, Bernstein argued that training motor skills is about finding movement solutions to problems, not just repeating the same motion. Modern studies back this up. Paula Silva, another researcher, talks about anti-fragility, essentially resilience. She argues that the best athletes are those who can adapt their movements. If you train a single ideal movement pattern, like hitting a forehand loop in the same repeated way, you'll become good at that specific movement pattern, but not very capable of playing forehand topspins in match situations, which involves a lot of randomness and diverse situations. A comment on this is that even though these researchers emphasize the importance of adaptability, it does not mean that every stroke is completely different from another. There will obviously be similarities between the strokes that each player hits. If we recall my video called Motor Learning, I talked about how we, according to the theory of generalized motor programs, store movements in long-term memory. These movements are parameterized and we adjust movement time and movement range based on how we want to execute the stroke. According to this theory, shouldn't we train an optimal technique and then adapt it to the incoming ball? Well, perhaps, but focusing solely on technique without placing it in context can be misleading. And for a coach to believe that they know exactly how a forehand loop should be executed for every individual can also be dangerous. And how many players can you think of that have had techniques that looked perfect in practice but failed to use those strokes effectively in matches? Executing an unstoppable forehand is about much more than just performing a fast and powerful motion. Idealized, polished strokes are sometimes trained in environments without context. For example, when we receive slow balls with no spin at multiball. In such cases, we are balanced and not forced to link previous strokes with upcoming movements or information about what the opponent is doing. In matches, however, we are often forced to play off balance and from uncomfortable positions. If we train and learn such idealized strokes in decontextualized environments, we risk becoming fragile in matches. So we must be adaptable. As I mentioned, research shows that better players display more variation in their execution, and therefore we should not strive for a specific idealized technique. We should aim for effective outcomes from our strokes. Take a look at Aruna Quadri, Timo Boll, and Fan Zhendong. They all have excellent forehand attacks, but they look quite different. Of course, there are some similarities as well. Certain biomechanical elements are essential to generating a lot of power into the ball. That's unavoidable. However, we must account for the fact that everyone's body is different and understand that there isn't just one way to do things. Within the ecological approach, learning is viewed as a process of exploration where players experiment with different movement patterns and develop a better understanding of and relationship to their environment and its demands. According to the ecological approach, coaches are not seen as instructors who hold the answers to the correct technique, but rather as guides who create training conditions that encourage players to explore movements, for example, by introducing environmental constraints, such as raising the net. In his first book on motor learning, Rob Gray writes that players with less variation in their movements wear out specific muscles more and, as a result, suffer injuries more frequently. This is an argument against training a single correct technique and in favor of varying movements and being adaptable to the environmental demands. Okay, so to sum it up a little bit, I would say that bad technique is when you are limited in multiple ways. For example, you cannot generate power, your strokes are predictable, your movements are inefficient, and you get tired quickly. If you fall into these categories, you should definitely work on improving your technique. Another crucial point is that bad technique can lead to injuries. If you perform a movement that causes you pain in your body, you should obviously try to change that movement. In other words, we should absolutely strive to develop good technique. The question is how we go about it. There is plenty of research on the type of feedback coaches should provide their players and what athletes should focus on to perform effective movements. These are topics I will discuss in upcoming videos, so subscribe to the channel and I'll see you in the next videos.